Welcome to the Separation Anxiety in Dogs Decoded podcast. I am your host, Ness Jones, and we'll be deep diving into all things separation anxiety. But before we get started, please make sure you like this episode, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you never miss another one. And don't forget, if you are interested in joining my easy step-by-step training program to resolve separation anxiety in your dog, you'll find the link in the show notes. Now let's get started. Hello. So in this episode, I am going to be talking about how to ensure a successful training session with your dog. So there's a number of things we can do to put in place that will help your dog cope better when you walk out the door. And especially, I can't stress this enough, when we're building foundations, when we're building solid foundations for the future, we want to not make it, we want to make it as uncomplicated for the dog and as easy for the dog to succeed. And that sets us up for success as we go down the track, because the more positive experiences your dog has with home alone time, the more able they are going to be able to cope as you go up in time. Just think about the times that you have left them in the past and they've been terrified, they have a meltdown, they have a freak out. Next time you walk out the door, they're expecting another bad time, another bad session of being home alone, and it makes it harder and harder for them to cope. And that's when we see escalation of behavior, and sometimes those behaviors start sooner when you walk out the door. So, whatever the time frame is before we start seeing the behavior, it can become less and less and less. So how do we ensure that our dog is in the right state of mind before we even step outside the door? So firstly, we would want to make sure that the dog has had all its needs met. And what I like to say is that they're ready to rest and relax. So they're already in the frame of mind where they're thinking, okay, this is a good time to be restful, to be calm. They're not in an active frame of mind. It's not a time of day where they are more active. So, for example, most dogs, not all dogs, but most dogs are more active in the morning. It's, bright and early, and they're ready to get out and about and do things. I have had a few clients, though, where their dog is actually a bit of a stay in bed type dog, almost like a teenager that doesn't want to get out of bed. So there are some dogs that don't want to get up and about early, but most dogs in general are probably more active in the morning. So that would not be a great time to train. Especially for a young dog. I think they grow out of this a lot, but not all dogs do this too. But generally, there's a zoomy time, the witching hour, when, usually later in the day, maybe 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the day, where the dog might get the zoomies and they've got lots of energy. So again, not a great time to train. They're probably not in the right mindset to train when we're building those solid foundations. So we want them to be ready to rest and relax. So how are we going to achieve that? Well, firstly, we want to make sure they've had their exercise. They've got all that energy out of their system, and they're not expecting to, for example, go for a walk. They're not expecting play. They're not expecting an event. So if you think you've got a dog that's got lots of energy, you need to find ways to remove it, in a sense. So they're not too energetic. We want them to be nice and calm and relaxed. That's going to look different for each dog. Not all dogs need the same amount of energy, we also want to be very, very cautious that the type of exercise the dog is getting isn't overstimulating them. So that can happen too, that they're getting so much energy, but it's actually hyping them up more. So that's not great. So finding the right balance for your dog, what that might look like. It could be swimming, it could be running after the ball, it could be playing with other dogs, it could just be a simple walk. It also will depend on the dog's age, if they're teenagers and they've got lots of energy, or maybe if they're senior dogs and they're not so energetic and they don't require as much. But exercise is definitely one of the things that we can factor into the equation. The next thing is enrichment. Now, that is, for me, where the dog has to use its brain, challenge the dog to use some of its mental capacity to solve something or find something. So that is going to look different as well for each dog. I mean, you can give them a Kong. It is enrichment, but for me, I think the dog really, a dog that has to solve a problem is going to be so much more relaxed. So for me, enrichment is where the dog is mentally challenged. And that could look like sniffing games, find it games. It could be something like trick training or obedience training, but something that the dog has to think and problem solve. And maybe you can get a little bit of a dopamine hit from that. So we don't want the problem to be so frustrating and so challenging that they give up, because that can happen. We want that to be just enough where they are mentally satisfied. And I can see it with my own dogs. I've got working dogs. They're energetic dogs, and they do like to use their brains. In fact, they thrive on it. They love things like scent games, tracking, finding food, finding toys, things like that. So they're mentally challenged, and I can notice the difference in their mindset and their energy levels once they've had the right type of enrichment. We can talk more in depth about enrichment in a later episode, but I just, it's going to look different for every dog. But something it is very important to do to make sure that your dog is, again, ready to rest and relax. Also, you will not want to do any training when they are hungry, because they might be hangry, but generally, they're not going to settle as well if they've got an empty belly. So don't do it if they're expecting dinner. Feed them first and then maybe do the training. Make sure they've been toileted. Do they need to go to the toilet? If they need to go to the toilet, they're not going to be able to rest and relax. Make sure they're not expecting an event. So if you've just come home from work, maybe it's their playtime or their walk time, whatever it is, I would not be doing training. Then get all their needs met. That's really important. Meet all their needs, because they're going to be much more likely to succeed with their training session. So choose the time of day where your dog is most ready to rest and relax. I'm going to keep saying that because we want to build those solid foundations. So we're going to start with the easiest scenario for the dog as well. So we're not going to be worried about time of day, in the sense that we're not going to make it overcomplicated for the dog. We're going to train when it is the easiest time of the day for the dog. And again, that's going to look different for every dog. Day of the week can also impact them. Sometimes training on a weekend could be really difficult for the dog. So we're not going to start with that scenario. If the weekends they see that you've put different clothes on, everything's a little bit different, and maybe they're expecting to come with you. So we would factor that in eventually down the track, but initially, again, we want to make it as easy for the dog as possible. Did the dog have a bad day? Did it have to go to the vets? Did something negative happen to them that day? Maybe they didn't have a great day at doggy daycare. There's something called trigger stacking. So it can be a series of insignificant little things but when you lump them all together, the end of it can be that the dog is going to overreact. So it's good to know what's going on in your dog's life. Just because you don't perceive something as bad doesn't mean that they don't. And that could include storms or high winds, environmental factors, a tree falling down in the backyard. You understand what's happened, but they may not, and it could give them a fright. New neighbours or noisy neighbours. Maybe the neighbours are having a fight. Are there workmen in the area? Are they getting enough sleep? So sleep is a big one, important. Are they too stimulated? And of course, the age of the dog is always going to play a factor in how they do. So there's some quick tips on how to set the dog up for success. Don't train when they're expecting something. Make sure they're ready to rest and relax. Look at their lives. Is anything going on in their lives? Any big changes that have happened in their lives? New person coming into the home, somebody leaving the home, routine changes, all those sort of things. And then just make sure that you're not training when they're unsettled, when they're a little bit more active, they're unable to be calm. We want them to be calm when we're building those solid foundations. You have been listening to Ness Jones on the Separation Anxiety in Dogs Decoded podcast. Don't forget to check out the show notes to learn more about my programs and how I can help you with tailored training. Until next time.